Today on an all-new Dr. Phil.
The girls were paddled every day.
Former Hephzibah House students speak out about spanking punishments.
You're laid face down and somebody hold your arms and legs.
A big heavy chair placed over your head.
To protect the girls from getting hurt.
That's okay with you.
They explained to me in detail why they did what they did.
You have 2 master's degrees in psychology, and because someone tells you that's why they're doing it, then you just assume that's why they're doing it?
Well, clearly you don't believe in spanking.
Oh, hell no. Today's going to be a changing day in your life. You've never had anybody working harder to bring you to the threshold of change than right now. Okay. Yesterday, former students of Hephzibah House, a Christian boarding school run by Pastor Ron Williams, were here with shocking allegations about what they claim went on behind the walls of the school. Now, they claim they were locked away from the world, forced to do hard labor and eat moldy food contaminated with bugs, and were monitored 24/7 through a surveillance system. Now, Pastor Ron Williams' son, Ben, actually agrees with these allegations. His parents founded the boarding school where he grew up, and he said it was time to speak the truth about life there. But Lucinda, another former student, had a completely different experience. She said she was happy at Hephzibah House, saying the food was out of this world, and the chores were just really not that bad. Things got heated, and strong accusations were flying. Here's what happened so far.
We walked in, and the lady shut the door and started locking several locks. And I just knew something was wrong. The windows were sealed. They had screws, so you couldn't open them.
Susan, what's really going on there?
It's a lockdown facility where these girls are broken.
And you said when you were there 30 weeks, you weren't allowed to speak.
Absolutely. I was constantly on sentence restriction. You are not allowed to communicate with the girls you're around. You are only allowed to do necessary talking to the staff, such as, may I use the restroom?
The girls who are speaking out against Hephzibah House in a negative light are lying. A lot of the girls that came in were actually girls that should have probably gone to juvie. These girls were lawbreakers.
For the first time, a family member speaks out about the strict religious boarding school.
I'm the only Williams that's ever said yes. The verbal abuse, the physical abuse, it occurred.
The first 4 months I was there every day, I was paddled.
I never experienced any abuse in the house, and I don't believe anybody else did either.
Lucinda, do you disagree on most or everything that's been said here so far?
I do.
It is very much like a jail. Every square inch of that place is under camera and audio surveillance.
I knew right away that it had a very overwhelming and oppressive feel to it.
Those red outfits, those are the uniforms.
That's what we had to wear in front of the church, so the whole church would know that we were in trouble.
She is exactly correct. That's been that way for years.
Your father says it was never intended to humiliate the girl, but to help her see that there were consequences for wrong behavior.
I cry bull.
The food at Hephzibah House was absolutely disgusting. We would have sprouts that had all these bugs in them. Gross.
The food at Hephzibah House when I was there was absolutely delicious.
And how do you explain her saying, oh no, these were great salads and wonderful environment?
We actually called the food slop for a reason.
But the pastor says in this school, the girls were never starved.
I went to Hephzibah House about 130 pounds. In 4 months, I dropped down to 88 pounds.
Does that seem reasonable?
I caught Susan in lie, so I would have to see the actual documentation. How did she know she was 88
They
pounds?
weighed us every Saturday morning. My hair was falling out. My teeth were pitted. I was starving.
I wasn't there when she was there, so I couldn't vouch
Does
for
that
her.
concern you to hear that? Well, Cindy worked at Hephzibah House in the summer of '81. She was there for only 3 months, but says she never forgot that summer and hoped nobody would remember that she was even there. Take a look.
Hello, my name is Cindy. I worked at Hephzibah House the summer of 1981. I observed everything that happened that summer. I wrote letters home to my boyfriend, and that is why I have some of this documented. The environment was extremely harsh. It was a very cold, unloving, brutal environment. I did witness abuse. I witnessed the girls being paddled numerous times, multiple times a day. I witnessed the Williams children being abused. That has been a great grief and frustration to me, and it did a lot of harm to the girls.
Well, joining us via Polycom is Cindy. Cindy, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome.
You have a very strong feelings about this, and I wanted to look at some excerpts of a letter that you sent to your boyfriend concerning the food, and this was in the summer of '81. You said in your letter, quote, "I feel like I'm a missionary in Africa. The girls are hungry, and I mean seriously hungry. Their stomachs growl constantly. The ones who have been here a long time are painfully thin." Then you list a girl's name and say, "Looks like she's about to starve to death." Now, this is what you wrote in 1981 before any of this conversation or debate. So that was contemporaneous with your experience there in 1981. You were concerned then, correct?
Yes. The food was very substandard. I can remember the first meal that I had there. I don't remember what it was. I just remember that they put this plate in front of me. It was not standard food like any American has ever eaten. And there was dead silence around the table. And there were withheld giggles because the girls were waiting to see how I was going to handle this. And I just looked up and said, "I can't eat this." And I was quickly made aware that if I did not eat every bite of this, I would have it back for the next meal. We worked hard all day. We did physical labor in a field, and we were hungry.
Well, the pastor says all students participate in chores after school each day. They're not overworked. They all share in the work, including the staff. They're just typical household chores that are done at any home. And he said back in the early '80s, while the buildings were being built, the students did participate in helping. It was hard work, but there were a lot of people helping and sharing with the workload. And he said it was, just nothing out of the ordinary. But you also wrote in a letter to your boyfriend concerning these paddlings back in '81, and you said, and I quote, "The girls are paddled constantly, but I'll never get used to it. It makes me feel sick. They get anywhere from 7 to 10 licks for all sorts of minor offenses, for biting their fingernails, for not being feminine, for pride, for being homesick, for crying. I would pass out if someone hit me that hard.
Yes.
It is not like a normal spanking. It is truly horrifying."
Yes.
What did you see that made you write that?
Well, I saw that every day. The girls were paddled every day. They had a systematic system for punishments where if you got essentially demerits, but we called them work duties. If you got a certain number of work duties, you got a spanking that night. But in addition to that, a staff member could simply look at you and say, "Karen, you look frightful. Go to the blue room. You're going to have a spanking for that." And no one said a word. The spankings were nonstop. And if somebody who is on staff at Hephzibah says they can't remember that, I will never forget.
How would a spanking take place?
A heavy chair placed over your head, staff members holding your arms, and then the paddling with a board, the rod of God.
I'm sorry, that's just not okay. And later, there was an allegation that there were alarms, and they said this is true. There are alarms set at night.
All of the lights in the basement would wake every single girl up because somebody was rolling around too much.
And there's also concealed microphones in the ceilings. They can hear even a whisper.
You guys, how would a spanking take place?
By the time I was at Hephzibah House, when they punished us, they isolated us. So I cannot confirm. I personally was never spanked, but I cannot confirm my sisters because they isolated us completely when we were being punished.
Okay.
And in my case, it was similar to Susan, not as frequently when Lucinda and I were there as when Susan was there, but up into the office, lay down flat on the floor.
Yes.
A heavy chair placed over your head, staff members holding your arms out to the side, sometimes a staff member holding your legs down, and then the paddling with a board, the rod of God, as it was called.
So you're laid face down,
Face down.
Yes.
and somebody holds your arms and legs?
And a big heavy chair placed over your head so you can't jump up. It wasn't done to protect them from us jumping up to hurt them. It was just done as more of a, we're gonna show you even now how much power we have over you.
Domination.
It's gonna just humiliate you and put you in the most submissive position that you could be with multiple staff members around and a person hitting you. So
Well, they explained to me when I had my spanking, we're going to hold your hand so you don't put your hand behind and get swatted. You know, when the paddle comes down, you don't get your hand hit by the paddle. So we're going to hold your hands. We're going to hold your feet so you don't move.
They couldn't just tell you to keep your hands up?
The chair was put over my back, and I took my 3 swats. I got 3 swats. I only received 3 spankings the whole time I was there. The first time I had to lay down. The other 2 times, all I had to do was bend over. And my swats were literally just 3 times each time.
could I interject something, please? I'm sorry. You just can't see that laying a girl down, even if it happened to you one time, you can't see that laying a teenage girl and a huge man like Ron Williams or any other staff member spanking you, laying you on the ground with chairs over your head and hold, you can't see that as being wrong?
I watched that as a child.
That is scary.
So you confirm this?
Dr. Phil, I watched it. Oftentimes, the door would be left open to the office, the room, the spanking room. And the same room that you were spanked in was also the same room that a lot of counseling occurred. So that room became a very fearful room, frankly. But I witnessed as a child multiple times the girls being laid out, held down, the chair put over their leg. Oftentimes, the chair was put over their leg and their chest. Then they were prayed over, and then the spankings were 7 to 10 swats. I never heard anything less than 7. But that could have happened. I'm saying I never heard anything less than 7.
Okay, but everybody's confirming that they're in a prone position, legs and arms held, a chair placed over them to pin them down further.
Now, that's how the girls were spanked, yes.
I'm sorry, that's just not okay. I mean, you can, if and I understand that some of these girls are rebellious and run away and have issues, but if as a professional, you're endorsing that as appropriate behavior in disciplining someone, I have real problems with your judgment. You're telling me that's okay with you?
The reason they did that, Dr. Phil, was to protect the girls from getting hurt.
You're telling me that's okay with you?
It is okay with me.
Okay, and your training is in what?
Psychology. I have 2 master's degrees.
You have 2 master's degrees, and you work with disadvantaged children?
I work with foster children, and I work with fighting against CPS.
Okay, so if you went into a foster home and you saw that foster parents had a foster child and they pinned them to the floor, held their arms and legs and put a chair over them and beat them with a board 3 times, 5 times, 7 times, you would check that off as okay.
Well, Dr. Phil, when they...
Kind of yes or no.
My thing is they did it to protect the girls from getting hurt. I don't, to this day, believe in spankings. I believe in natural consequences. But I'm saying when I was there, that's how they did it. But the reason they did it that way was for protection of the girls not getting hurt.
Well, no, you don't know why they did it. You just speculate as to why they did it.
No, that's what they told me.
Well, that's what I mean.
They said, we're going to hold your
okay,
hands. So
come on. You're telling me you have 2 master's degrees in psychology, and because someone tells you that's why they're doing it, then you just assume that's why they're doing it?
Dr. Phil, I was beat before I went to Hephzibah House so severely, I didn't know what a spanking was. Okay, so when they explained to me, I had to wait 3 days for my first spanking. I had to wait for them to get permission from my parents to get that first spanking. and I was nervous because I didn't know what a spanking was. And so they explained to me in detail why they did what they did and how they were doing it, because I grew up where I didn't know what that was.
So the explanation that I'm doing this for you,
Right.
this is in your best interest. I'm getting ready to beat you with a board, and I'm doing this in your best interest.
Well, clearly you don't believe in spanking.
Oh, hell no.
Okay, so I understand that. But 30 years ago, this is what we're talking about. 30 years ago, spanking was acceptable. I don't approve of spankings today, and they don't spank today. But 30 years ago, you're telling me across the whole United States and the world, parents that discipline their children through spankings are abusers? 30 years ago, it was accepted and done in public schools.
But other people weren't getting laid on the floor with the chair over their head.
Yeah, well, no, you're quite right. I don't believe in it now, and it is ridiculous that you're justifying pinning someone to the floor with a chair and 4 people getting around on their arms and legs and then beating them with a board. That is absurd. Here's the response that the school gave. Corporal correction was utilized for those who were defiant and rebellious in some way. Corporal correction was legal in Indiana and was done with written consent and for the parents involved. Such correction was discontinued in our ministry in the mid-1990s.
That's a lie.
2 or more staff were always present. You say that's a lie, why?
We know for a fact they were still spanking in 2000.
The only reason they stopped spanking, Dr. Phil, was fear. They still believe in it. These ladies pressured them, and they were scared to death to keep spanking, but they still believe it and they still teach it.
Were you told to lie to your parents in letters and communications?
I observed my mom reading those letters. She would yell down over the intercom, so-and-so, and you need to redo your letter.
And later,
Patty Williams grabs her paddle and she beat that nursing baby. Let me tell you, I thought they were going to kill that baby.
were you told to lie to your parents in letters and communications?
Absolutely.
They didn't say lie to your parents. They said, you have to write this kind of a letter.
Well, here's what they said about that. The girls are allowed and even encouraged to be honest in their letters home. The only requirement is that they be honest in what they are saying, even if they wish to complain, but it has to be the full truth. Letters have always been monitored, and every parent who brings their daughter knows this rule and consents to it. Supervised calls 1 time a month, visit every 3 months. This is accurate. Again, parents agree to this when they bring their daughter. If they said they wanted to go home, they ended the visit with their parents. This does not sound right. We are not aware of this. And so what they're saying is, oh, no, you can complain to your parents in the letters, but you just have to tell the truth. And I guess they decide what's the truth.
Yes, thank you, sir.
That's
it's their truth.
Yes.
Okay, so tell me how that worked.
I observed my mom reading those letters my whole growing up years. And I remember many a time she would yell down over the intercom. That sound familiar? And, you know, so-and-so, and you need to redo your letter. Because it, you know, and there was something in there. I watched my mom do that multiple times as a young man. And it was their version of the truth.
And additionally, when our letters would come in from our family, they would be read. And then if there was something that the staff...
blocked out with a black marker.
Right. They thought it was inappropriate, they'd cross it out before we got our letter.
So they were censored.
Very much so.
So you couldn't communicate back and forth.
Yes.
My father would write me, and he was a big sports fan, and so I'd get these letters that would have like 3 sentences that weren't blocked out because he wasn't allowed to talk about sports.
Movies were wrong.
There was an allegation that there were alarms if you moved too much in bed or got up, and they said this is true. There are alarms set at night to prevent girls from running and doing unethical things among each other during the night.
We had pads on our bed when I was there, so if we rolled around too much, all of the lights in the basement would wake every single girl up because somebody was rolling around too much.
And there's also concealed microphones in the ceilings. They can hear even a whisper.
Really?
I installed them as a teenage boy.
You have to understand, these beds are this close together, 3 high, well, maybe this close. What do you think?
Yeah, they're very close.
Enough space for a wardrobe.
Well, Lucinda says she wants the women speaking out against Hephzibah House to put an end to all this nonsense because Pastor Ronald Williams doesn't do anything but pray for them. We'll be right back. You guys think that the philosophy is to break your will.
Absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely. 100%.
It was a spiritual, mental, physical healing for me.
I want to close Hephzibah House down. I want to make sure that Ron Williams never has access to children.
When I went to Hephzibah House, my parents couldn't do the type of research that's available now. Google Hephzibah House. You'll come up with hundreds of testimonials and people sharing their experiences about all the different types of abuse.
Yeah, I think it's silly not to believe victims. This is not a new thing that's happened in the last year. This has been going on since at least the 1980s.
Well, Susan, Kaylee, and Gabby say they want to raise awareness about Hephzibah House, a Christian boarding school for teen girls where they claim they experienced abuse that still haunts them to this day. Ben, the founder's son, says he relates to their pain, but Lucinda is here defending the good work she says that Pastor Williams has done. We invited Pastor Williams to be here. He respectfully declined, but gave us voluminous answers to these allegations. They make no apology for the fact that this is a conservative, religious curriculum for girls that have been brought there because they're not doing well in society in general. And so they need structure and they need guidance. But you guys think that it's just gone way overboard and that the philosophy is to break your will.
Absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely. 100%.
And that's the philosophy of your mother.
That was always the philosophy of my mother.
Patty Williams was a horrible person. She was like this voice from above. She really just screamed down at us through the intercom. Her favorite thing to say was we were all gonna be whores, we were gonna end up dead, or we were gonna end up in prison because none of us were getting right with God.
Patty was a very brutal woman. She had a huge temper. She was very, very harsh. I saw her take another staff lady's baby. They took him to the front of the church and they beat him with a board about that big. He sounded like he was dying. He was choking. The baby was in trouble. And everything inside of me was screaming, Susan, get up and save that baby. And I just sat there. They beat that baby until he was silent, and it took a long time. I wasn't sure they hadn't killed him.
I had to read these articles that were written by Ron Williams and Patty Williams. Ron said it was the goal of him and his wife to have the will of all of their children broke by the age of 1, and that would mean spanking them starting in infancy. He would say babies are depraved sinners when they're born.
And this is what your father said about this. Make sure children have will broken by 1 year old.
Oh, Dr. Phil.
God's goal, child be hurt with pain of spanking during a session of correction. Use a rod.
I was 15 years old, sitting in a church service. Patty Williams is sitting over here, this direction, with her kids, and she has a paddle on the seat beside her.
She always had a paddle and seat beside her
And
in
she
church.
gets up and she grabs her paddle, and this young woman took her nursing infant up to the front, and she beat that nursing baby. Pastor Williams, he stood behind the pulpit at the front of the church. He stopped preaching, and he said, hit him again, sister, hit him again.
He did that more than once.
Let me tell you, I thought they were going to kill that baby. That baby stopped crying, and they kept hitting him. I've never, ever, ever gotten over that.
Well, here's a response from the pastor. Babies are not beaten in our ministry. We have no idea what they're talking about.
Well, Dr. Phil, remember, they don't call them beatings. They call them spankings. So you got semantics going on here.
It would seem like it is semantics, or he's contradicting himself because of what we just put up. That is a quote from him. God's goal: child be hurt with pain of spanking during a session of correction, and make sure children have their will broken by 1 year old. What do you think about that?
I don't agree with that. I have never, ever said I agree with everything that Hephzibah House does, ever. I just know that the 3 years that I was there, I never witnessed abuse. I never felt abuse, especially from somebody who was severely abused. I mean, I wrote a book about my abuse growing up in foster care.
And I'm very sorry you had to go through that, and I understand how, by contrast, this might not seem quite as shocking to you as it might to someone else, given what you've been through in the past. That context means a lot.
Well, and I learned a lot, Dr. Phil, while I was there. For me, it was a spiritual, mental, physical healing for me.
That's another person that was there that said they had a good experience.
I literally don't believe some of these stories until I see how they are 10 years from now.
Well, here's another quote from a student that was there. This is Alexis. She says, I went to Hephzibah House in 2014. I was 17 years old. I was there for exactly 13 months. The staff helped me day in and day out. They were my study buddies, encouragement, and my rock. I'm proud to say I got my high school diploma. I'm more than happy I went there. Hephzibah House picked me up, took me from my past, and set me on a new path. God is so good, I can't say it enough. So that's another person that was there that said they had a good experience.
Dr. Phil, can I tell you something that happened to us in
Please.
the past couple days while we've been here that's related to this? Kaylee just got out 2017.
March 21st.
And over the weekend, another girl that just got out of Hephzibah House, June 1st, 2019, she went back to her family, Mennonite community. She was having such a hard time dealing with what she went through at Hephzibah House. She had attempted suicide at Hephzibah. It was never reported to her parents, never reported to authorities. She went home to her parents, told them, I'm feeling like I'm gonna harm myself. She begged for them to let her get medical help. She needed mental health assistance. They said no, it just goes against the religion.
Right.
She reached out because she knew Kaylee from her time at Hephzibah House. We were able to speak with a police officer. We determined, yes, she was 18 years old. We arranged to get her rescued from her home. We followed every letter of the law, got her rescued from her home, got her to a safe place. We have a flight in place for her, somebody to fly with her, and she's going to get help because that's what she begged for. And it was, it was all these former students that came together for the transportation,
Ship money together.
paying for the airfare, paying for everything to take care of this
258
girl.
what?
258 former students I am in contact with, and I know 4, maybe 5, that said that they benefited from Hephzibah House.
Dr. Phil, I think it's important to understand that if you'd have talked to me 6 years ago, well, even 10 years ago, I would have said what Alexis said. But I had a secret hell going on in my own heart and mind of serious issues. You understand that my father has a very powerful pull. He's a very charismatic man. And you are constantly, you have one desire, and that's to please my dad. And to please him, you have to learn to say the right things. You have to learn to say do the right things. So that way he says, okay, I'm proud of you. So I literally don't believe some of these stories until I see how they are 10 years from now.
Right.
Based upon my own life.
Well, he reports that when students turn 18 years of age, they're legally allowed to leave if they wish. We do try to encourage them to finish their high school if they are close, but we never force any girl to stay over 18 against her will. If one chooses or demands to go home, arrangements are made. We've had many students stay beyond 18 to complete their high school work, but that's voluntary. Susan, Kaylee, and Gabby and Mary want Hephzibah House shut down. Will that ever happen? We'll talk about that next. I'm here with Susan, Kaylee, Gabby, Lucinda, Ben. On Polycom, we have had input as well from Mary and Cindy. And so we've had a lot of people weigh in on this today. We've also heard from the pastor in written responses. You know, he basically says that these girls are all encouraged. Says it is a Christian environment, that everything is designed to help these girls. They're never told that they'll be a drug addict or end up in prison. They're never told that their parents don't love them. They're never told that they don't care enough, that they don't send money. They're never told that they're worthless and all the things that would be demeaning them. Never told that you can't talk for 30 weeks, that there sometimes might be some restrictions. They said they do take people off antidepressants before they get there
Taken off of
because they can't manage them once they're there, so they say they are weaned off of them before they get
Not
there.
weaned.
So now you guys talked about at times having forced exams to test whether the hymen was intact, et cetera, and that these were involuntary examinations, right?
By the time I went to Hephzibah House, this was not a thing that I had to go through. I did have to get a physical exam at a doctor's office, but it was not what these girls went through.
I had the forced exam.
Gabby, you had to go through the sexual exam.
Yes.
And Mary, you had to go through an exam, correct?
I had to go through an exam, yeah.
And this is not what you wanted to do, Gabby, right? Mary, was this something you wanted to do?
When they held me down for it.
They held you down for it. Well, I asked about that, and the response was, this is an egregious false accusation to say a medical doctor sexually assaulted our students while doing a very common feminine exam. These exams were required with the written consent of the parents for many years due to the risk of asymptomatic sexually transmitted diseases with which some girls would arrive because of their history of sexual activity or sexual abuse. These licensed physicians always perform these procedures in privacy with a nurse or female staff member being witness. As medical technology has improved, these exams have been discontinued, and every matriculating student sees her own physician before entering our school, and we are not concerned with how the doctor is dressed as much as we are with the doctor's credentials.
Mine was done at the facility, and they were called closets. It may have been bigger than a closet, but it was the closet C. I was taken into that room with the school nurse, and then a man came in. Yeah, he wasn't dressed like a doctor. I had my school uniform on. I was forced onto a bed, and I was protesting. I was holding my dress down the whole entire time. I told them no, and my dress was lifted anyways. And this exam was forced upon me, what I'm assuming now maybe was some sort of a pap smear. I did get my medical records years later. Mine said, check to see if hymen is intact. That was it. They told us later when we've talked about this that it was to check for STDs. There was no blood work done.
I'm very sorry.
I talked to these young girls, and so many of them report, there's a group of 3 girls that had this exam done one after another. There was no sink in this room. There was they have no memory of gloves being used. These girls could hear each other screaming. One girl screamed so much that she says Patty Williams came down and paddled her.
You know, I read the response from the pastor, and I understand and have said very much that if you have a home for teenagers that have been rebellious or have really been unmanageable, at home or in society, that structure is absolutely required. But there's a point at which structure becomes oppression. There's a point at which discipline becomes abuse. And I've tried to present both sides of this so people can make up their own mind. Would you recommend someone to go to this
I do.
place?
I actually tried to have my daughter go there at one point.
I have a question for you. Would you recommend someone to go to this
I do.
place?
I actually tried to have my daughter go there at one point.
Awful.
Over the years, I've talked to Ron about certain things. You know, you need to change this. You can't be doing that. That is a, you know, a form of abuse. You can't be, you know, and I've had those conversations with him.
What was it that you counseled him he needed to stop because it was abusive?
The non-talking, that they needed to do what's called couches and actually allow the girls to communicate. Because I realized that was my coping skill and I was very comfortable with that. But I told him that that's crippling to some of the girls. And
Anything else?
and things about making sure to document certain things that he needed to document.
So even if there's a question of impropriety, you would still risk sending your daughter there?
What, the spanking?
No, I mean, this is clearly, you would admit that the school's at least controversial.
Well, it is controversial, but you
But you would
understand I'm a
still send
Christian too. I don't believe in spankings and stuff like that.
But you would still send your daughter there
I would have, yes.
knowing that there's at least the possibility that what these women have experienced is accurate.
But I was there for 3 years. I didn't experience what they're experienced, you know?
You totally discount what they're saying.
No, I believe that they were traumatized, but trauma doesn't equal abuse necessarily, okay?
Well,
So,
I'm just curious that because as a parent, if there was even the remotest possibility that there was some impropriety happening at some facility, I wouldn't let my child get it within 100 miles of there. Not even if I didn't know it. You know, even if I didn't know for sure, if I thought it was even a possibility, I wouldn't let my child get within 100 miles of there. Not saying that it's happening, just the question that it could possibly be happening, that's just a risk I wouldn't take, because my most valued asset, my most precious assets in this world are my children and my grandchildren. If there was even a question, I would not let them within 100 miles of that place. And
but
I'm
see,
just
I am
curious.
who I am today because of Hephzibah House and the teachings that I learned.
Gotcha. And I understand your point of view. You think this school should be shut down?
100%.
Okay, you think it should be shut down? Absolutely. And on Polycom, Mary, you guys think it should be shut down?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely, right now.
Absolutely.
Here's the problem. CPS could investigate a current complaint there, but there are jurisdictional issues here. The state has no jurisdiction over this private religious school.
Right.
There's no criteria, they have no jurisdiction. Child caring institutions and group homes operated by churches and religious ministries are exempt from child services licensure if it does not care for a child who is a delinquent and it does not operate for profit. So under those laws in Indiana, this place can operate off the radar without accountability. The only thing that can happen is if a specific complaint is filed with Child Protective Services, then that specific complaint, that case can be investigated, but the school itself answers to no one.
That's right.
I want to thank all of my guests today, and as you know, this conversation will continue on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I will post all of the pastors' responses on our websites as well. We'll see you next time. Thanks for being here.